Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Pow, and today I'm doing week 47 of my 2020 reads. This week I had some really good solid reads, a lot of which were picture books, and I also NFN'd, or not for now'd, one book that was a little bit too much for me. So the first book that I finished this week was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is a new release that is a fantasy by the author of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which I had read earlier this year and really enjoyed. So I was excited about this new release. Sush read this out loud to me and it was really enjoyable. If you like atmospheric fantasy, I think that you'll like this book. A lot of this is all about the feel of the world, and in some ways the world building, and in some ways the characters, but there's very little plot here, and even in terms of characters, it's more discovering the characters rather than, a character arc. So this story takes place in this almost labyrinthine house, and this house has many different rooms filled with statues, and there is water, like ocean water, that comes and goes and flows through these rooms. It's very atmospheric. And Piranesi, our main character, is sort of learning about all of these different rooms. He's lived there for quite a while, but there's something very mysterious going on that unfolds as you go further in the story. I really enjoyed the atmosphere, I really enjoyed the writing, and I was actually very surprised by some of the topics that this book tackled. I wasn't expecting it to kind of go there, things really about mental health, and I thought it was really enjoyable. I think that if you're somebody who does like plot, this is probably not going to be for you, but if you enjoy just sitting in a world and experiencing it, I think it's very cool. Susanna Clarke definitely has gorgeous writing, so definitely enjoyed this. I think that the only thing for me was that it took a little bit of time to get into the story. I think though that part of that was that we started reading this during election week and it was hard for me to concentrate, and this book really is all about falling into that feel of the world, so we had to kind of pause that week and come back to it later. So that affected my reading experience a little bit, but I think maybe if I had read it at another time I would have fallen into the book quicker. In any case, for this read I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I read No Man's Land by A.J. Fitzwater. This is a short little historical fantasy queer novella by a New Zealand Maori author. Rachel at Kalanadi did an entire review for this, so I'm going to link that below, and I really recommend that you check out her review. This book was really well written. I thought it was so interesting. So this takes place during World War II, and we follow a girl, T, who is taking her brother's place at a farm where a lot of women have volunteered to go and work while a lot of the men are away at war, such as her brother. And so she's filling in, and there's so much in this that's just really interesting, talking about a lot of gender, a lot of queer issues, and a lot of sort of indigenous issues as well. A lot of this is about magic and about being Maori and about whether or not that's something that anybody can be upfront about, like share, or if there will be really bad social consequences. There's a lot of really interesting things going on in here, but I think what really makes this book cool is the writing style and the magic system are very interesting, very different than I think a lot of mainstream fantasy. The writing style itself is very poetic, and a lot of the scenes focus on the senses. They focus on the smells and the tastes and the feels of things. So there's very immersive, and a lot of it is poetic, where it's all about the emotion and the feeling, less about kind of the linear story of what is happening. So at points it can be a little bit confusing as to what exactly is happening, but I think that's part of that immersion and that beauty. So I think that the writing just sometimes was so gorgeous. It really was impressive to me, and the magic system itself, again, just so interesting. Things like being able to sense from the vibrations in the earth what is going on in another place, or being able to taste through the air or through the water what somebody else is feeling. Just lots of really interesting things going on. I think that also the queer storyline was really interesting, although it did get a little angsty at times. This is very much a coming of age story of the main character, and just sometimes it got a little angsty. I think that also there were a few rough edges in this novel where it would have these moments of brilliant, beautiful writing, and then there would be something just a little bit off, a little bit jarring. So it wasn't a perfectly smooth book, but I thought that there was so much in this that was really impressive and enjoyable, and I definitely recommend it. And again, check out Rachel's review, which I have linked below. I think this is really worth picking up, especially if you're trying to read more Indigenous authors or more authors outside of, you know, US and UK who are writing in English. I think it's definitely worth picking up. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read quite a few picture books that were recommendations from Priscilla at Bookie Charm, who I will link below, as well as the video she did recommending Latinx picture books. She has a couple of these videos, and I'm always impressed by the books that she recommends. They're really, really good. And this time, as soon as I saw it, I put holds on all of them at my library, so you're gonna see some of these for the next couple of weeks as I read through them, but they're great. The first of these that I finished was Sharuko by Monica Brown, illustrated by Elisa Chavarri. So this is actually a nonfiction biography about Sharuko, otherwise known as Julio Citeo, who was very, very influential archaeologist in Peru who was indigenous. So he was somebody who, growing up, very much valued the traditional stories of his people, but these were not something that were really valued in the mainstream, more European influenced culture. And there was a lot of dismissal of indigenous culture as not being at all kind of developed before Europeans came. And so he did a lot of archaeological research and went to a lot of places and found things like mummies and historical artifacts, and showed that actually Peruvian culture went back a very long time for all of the different indigenous tribes. And this is before the Incas as well. There were quite a few civilizations that lived for a long time in Peru. And so this is kind of his biography and talks a little bit about his finds. And it was really good. I thought it was so interesting. I think also it was really neat because Sush and I went to Peru, to Lima, a couple of years ago for a friend's wedding. We had a Peruvian friend who got married, and we went to a museum that had a lot of these archaeological facts in it. And so as I was reading through this book, I was like, oh yeah, I recognize that. I remember seeing that in the museum. So it was a very cool experience. The illustration style wasn't entirely to my taste, and at times it was a little bit dry, but I thought that the information was really cool. His life story was really cool, so it's very much worth the read. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next picture book that I finished was Away with Wild Things by Larissa Theule, illustrated by Sara Palacios. So this is a really sweet picture book about a little girl who loves being in nature, loves learning about all of the insects and spiders and butterflies and everything, is totally into that, but feels very uncomfortable in social situations and kind of tries to hide. And it's all about really recognizing her own beauty and her own strength. It had a very sweet message, and I loved the illustrations. They were absolutely gorgeous. Although it didn't necessarily grip me super deeply, I still thought it was a super, super sweet story, and I would recommend it as well. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read A New Kind of Wild by Zara Gonzalez Hoang. This is another sweet picture book, and again with a sweet message. So this is about a little boy from kind of a more rural area, used to being out in nature, who moves to a city and can't really see the beauty there, but he makes a friend who is from the city and sees all of the beauty that the city has to offer and kind of shares that with him. And so it's a sweet story about learning to love a new place. So I thought that message was really sweet. The art style was okay, not entirely to my style, but still had a lot to offer. But again, it wasn't necessarily thoroughly gripping to me, even though I definitely enjoyed it. So I also gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I read Honeysmoke by Monique Fields, illustrated by Yesenia Moises. This is a book about a little girl whose dad is white and whose mom is black, and she is some other color, and she's trying to understand what her color is. She's trying to find a name for it, and so it's about her journey to exploring what it means to be different colors and finding that color for herself. The illustrations in this were gorgeous. I loved the illustrations. The story itself was sweet, but maybe very, very young. It didn't necessarily have the complexity of discussion that I could have wanted of something like this, but you know, it is a picture book. I do think though that it was still a very good picture book that addressed a pretty interesting theme, so I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I did NFN, or Not For Now, a book, which was Son of a Trickster by Eden Robinson. So this is a book that I'd had on my radar for quite a while, but was a little bit intimidated by because I'd heard it was very dark and very heavy. But recently, Muddiness at My Name is Marines, who I will link below, did a review of this, so I will link that review below. And her review was so good, and I thought, I really want to try picking this up, even if it's a bit of a challenge. I just at least want to try it. So I definitely recommend her review. Check that out. But it was a little bit much for me. So I got through about 6%, and then I had to put it down. There were just some gruesome aspects that happened, especially involving dogs, that were it was just a little bit much for me, even though I thought that the book was amazing. The writing was so good. The story was so gripping. I was so engaged in it, but that was almost a problem because of that gruesomeness that happened. It was just too much for me. But it's not something that I'm DNFing. I definitely want to try this one again, but maybe in a couple of years when I just have developed more of a tolerance for that kind of darkness. What I was really surprised about in this book, by the way, was the humor. I was somehow not expecting it to be funny, but the author actually has this sort of really irreverent dark humor that I liked very, very much. So if you're somebody who can handle some darker topics and some violence in their books, you should pick this up, because I thought it was awesome and I just need to build up my tolerance. But I would actually recommend it even though I had to stop reading it. Okay, so that's everything for me for this week. If you guys have read any of these books, if you have any thoughts, any recommendations for me, anything at all, go ahead and leave me a comment down below.